Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. On a snowy Saturday, the snow just stopped. It was predicted Snowmageddon, the first major snowstorm of the year. And I'm not that far from the coast. I'm about 25 miles inland from the ocean. And the rain snow line was favorable. It stayed a lot warmer than expected. And I probably got 3 or 4 inches of wet, heavy slop that'll melt extremely fast when the sun comes out tomorrow. Go inland a half an hour, 45 minutes, they got 12 to 15 inches of snow. I'm okay with my outcome. So I have a hydraulic pump being delivered this afternoon. I was hoping it would show up and I could wrap up most of my hydraulic talk, which is what this is going to be, today. So I'm still in hopes that while I'm babbling on, the FedEx truck will come sliding into my driveway with my pump. But we got a lot of ground to cover before then, because I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk about, shop hydraulics and their practical applications. I've spent almost 3 years now talking about hydraulics and automatic transmissions. The principle's the same, but the reason I'm messing with this stuff today is I have a new rotary draw tubing bender coming that I'm going to convert to hydraulic, or finish converting it to hydraulics. That's a whole nother story when it gets here, but it brings up a lot of options. You can be extremely simple about the process, or you can get as complicated as you want. So figured it'd be a good time to discuss a few options. I spent unwillingly, I never intended to spend my entire life working on hydraulic stuff, but I went to work at a transmission shop, and that's all hydraulics, automatics anyway. And eventually made my way to a municipality where we had hundreds of pieces of equipment that pretty much every one of them had hydraulics of some sort. So there was a lot to know. And I don't claim to know it all, but I was exposed to quite a bit of it, and you never forget it. So let's start real simple. Some really smart dude by the name of Pascal, I believe, discovered, and put it in print anyway, that if you take a liquid and increase the pressure anywhere in the volume of liquid, it's going to distribute that force equally everywhere. That was his big discovery. We call it hydraulics. The force increase is a pump of some sort. It could be a hand pump. It could be an air cylinder pumping this for you. It can be a motor, be it gas or electric, turning a pump. And the more I talk about these, progressions of pumping, the more complicated it becomes. So starting simple, we got the old hand pump. We're all familiar with a bottle jack, a floor jack, a porta power. One stroke. You can't compress liquid, so once the air is out of this system and I'm connected to something, I'm going to displace oil, and it's going to do X amount of work. You could talk about the principles of hydraulics for a long time, but the bigger the area you're pushing on that's movable, in this case the piston in the ram or the transmission drum or whatever you're talking about, the more area you can push on, the more force you have. So the more work it can do. So a 1-inch hydraulic cylinder you're not going to do as much work as a 6-inch cylinder, and you get it. So once this is airtight, or airless I should say, because you can compress air but you can't compress liquid, one stroke is going to evenly displace X amount of oil, and it's going to, very predictable results. At some point, if I max out the cylinder, or it's to the point it can't squeeze something anymore, and I'm still pumping, you have to have a safety device. So a bypass valve, a pressure regulator, a safety valve, whatever you want to call it. In an automatic transmission pump, we call it a pressure regulator. It is a safety valve. It has to put the oil somewhere, because in an automatic transmission, the engine's running, hooked directly to the pump through the torque converter hub. And if the engine's running, we're pumping oil. And if we're not using it, it has to go somewhere. And in hydraulic systems, the common phrase for that is back to tank, the reservoir where the oil is kept, low pressure, ready to be sucked into the pump and do more work. So you have to get the oil back to tank. And that's going to factor in as we talk, I hope. So in this case, this red valve you see right here says do not adjust. That is a safety valve. So if I come up against something and no more work can be done, I'm not just going to explode something. Again, that pressure is, the force is equal everywhere, and the weakest point is going to blow a hole in oil everywhere with dramatic results. So the hand pump, or if you're going to upgrade to the engine crane behind me with the air cylinder on the ram, that'll do the pumping for you. You can manually pump that, or you can let the air do it. Chug, chug, chug. And it will get the job done. And that cylinder, as I spoke before, is an option on the rotary draw tubing bender. But the adapters are available. But that particular cylinder that's 80 millimeters on the outside that fits the adapters are not. They're hard to find. Anyway, I never say nothing is available, but they're very difficult to find right now. The next step beyond the hand pump or the air pump is going to be a driven pump by a gas or electric motor, and I'm inside. We're in a shop, so electric is the choice. And you'll find a lot of 12-volt pumps too available that would probably potentially run a tubing bender. This is all tubing bender related, and I'm going to get back to talking about what brought me to what I did, but the problem, and the 12-volt ones are no cheaper than a 120 or 240 volt, plug-in unit. And a lot of people choose that option. I just don't think they did enough shopping, because if you have a 12-volt rig in the shop, you got to have a battery to run it. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I just want to plug it in and not have to worry about charging a battery. So to me, 12-volt option was not practical. So with the electric driven pump, or a driven pump, you can have the pump run only when you push the button, like for instance, the 2-post lift or the 4-post lift, automotive lift. You push the button, the motor kicks on, immediately turning the pump and pushing oil out to do work. Then you can jog, to set the locks and everything or whatever you're doing. It's direct acting. My exhaust bender has a giant electric motor, a giant pump, a giant fluid tank, and when you turn that on, it's on all the time. And you have a valve body. Now we got to introduce a valve body because we're not shutting off the flow of oil. We have to control it somehow. We're not just turning the motor off and on. So in that style setup, which is getting more sophisticated all the time, again, you have a control valve body, which is always putting the pressurized oil back to tank or to where you send it. Now, how you send it, in hydraulic terms, is single acting and dual acting. Single acting has one hose. So when I pump, pressurized oil goes out and, in this case, pushes my ram all the way out. Now I got to get it back in. When I release the valve, I don't know if you can see my hand, but when I release the valve, something has to return it. They make single-acting cylinders with internal springs. That's wicked handy. In the case of the tubing bender I bought, I'm going to have an external return spring, I believe. That's the holdup of why it hasn't shipped yet, but it's going to ship Monday. And you have to, in the rotary draw style bender, to stroke 90 degrees, to bend 90 degrees, you have to go to the end of the cylinder stroke, take the pressure off, pull a pin, return the cylinder, put the pin back in the die, and push again to even get to 90 degrees. So at least once in 90 degrees, you got to reset the pin. Hence the need for some easy way to have that return. If you got to push it in by hand, well, it's going to get more difficult. Not impossible, just more difficult. Now, dual acting, now we're talking doing some work. We'd have two hoses. There'd be pressurized oil on either side of the gland inside the hydraulic ram, and we pressurize one side, and the other side is ported to tank, and we can push out, and then we turn the valve the other way. We pressurized on the other side of the piston. The side that was pushing goes back to tank, and we push it the other way. You can go back and forth all day long with very minimal work. The machine will actually do the work for you, but now we just get really complicated. So on the rotary draw tubing bender, a dual acting cylinder would be awesome. However, in other applications, for instance, when I went shopping for a dump trailer, I specifically wanted single acting with gravity down, or, in this case, the dump body and the weight or whatever. Usually the dump body's empty when you're lowering it, but I prefer that in a dump truck because the body's faster. The weight of the body will push that cylinder down faster than having to run the motor through a valve. It's slower returning the dump body. So dual acting isn't always the best option, in my opinion. So that's the basics of hydraulics, at least how they're going to apply to my new tubing bender. So what were my options? Well, when I originally ordered it, I bought the bender and some dies from the bender manufacturer, JMR. I said JRM last time. I have Junior Motorsports, Dale Earnhardt Jr. on the brain, because I watched the Dale Jr. download and stuff like that, and I kept saying JRM when I was talking about tubing benders last time. It's JMR. They're out of California, American company. I was told they're an awesome company, and my experience so far, any questions, they've called me 3 times to make sure they're going to get it right and to keep me updated on what's going on and to ask questions. And it was nice that I had done enough research that I could hold my end of the conversation with the guy about why the dies I chose, what I was trying to accomplish, and right down to what hydraulic fitting is going to be on the ram. So I'm getting ahead of myself. So the night I ordered it, I was just going to get another cylinder like is on my engine crane. And after I ordered the bender, I went to Swag Off-Road. They have 2 different style adapters. I bought the fancier one that specifically says it needs an 80 millimeter OD piston, Harbor Freight model. Well, Harbor Freight's out of them for a while when I checked 2 weeks ago now. So the one I have on my engine crane is correct. I had bought another one that was a different diameter that I could have just put on the crane. I could have stuck with that program, but I ordered it on a Saturday night. My bender, Monday, I believe, afternoon, because California's 3 hours behind us. What I believe to be maybe the owner of JMR, I don't know, called to talk about dies and stuff, and he mentioned that while they have a hydraulic tubing bender on their website, it's the same bender with hydraulic options, and interesting sidebar, it's dual acting, but they have single acting hydraulic on one side, and they're taking a foot valve and blowing air into the cylinder on the other side to return it. Now that didn't sound like the greatest deal, and it was basically $1,000 extra. It had the foot pump, the hose, 2 hoses, and a cylinder, and the adapter to put it on the bender itself. Now that Saturday night, after I ordered my bender, I spent $210 at Swag Off-Road, and I'm going to spend $100 on the cylinder, which I did. So I spent $320 after taxes or more, $325, $330, whatever. So when JMR called me on Monday and he says, "Hey, I have a single acting cylinder that I'll adapt right on there for $300. I'll take it." Sweet. He says, the only drawback is I'm waiting for the return spring, but they're supposed to be here this week. So that was a couple weeks ago. They are there now, and it's going to be shipped out Monday. So now I had my cylinder situation taken care of. I called Swag Off-Road, and they could not have been nicer. I had contacted them earlier in the day because they said call them and they'll tell you what other cylinders, they have access to other cylinders because they're dealing with this every day. And he gave me a couple part numbers for that. That was great. I called back, same guy answered, explained that talking to the bender manufacturer, they offered me a cylinder. He says, great, I'll just cancel the order. And while we're talking, my PayPal shows that they returned the money. I mean, it was that fast. So I will definitely do business with them. I have the dimple die set, and another good American company, no problem to deal with. You pick up the phone, you're talking to a real person. So that is worth something. So now I just had to figure out how I wanted to power my cylinder. Lots of options here. The simplest is a foot pedal like this. Now I have a smaller version of this, same PSI that it operates under, but the reservoir or tank was smaller. I have it hooked to my yellow hole punch. It works perfect like that. And when I set up the yellow hole punch, I use this style. It's a Temco. These are the part numbers if you care. I love this style coupler. You can disconnect and reconnect and lose minimal amount of oil. It threads together. It has caps. It's a nice rig. So I could have, if that had enough capacity, now that's a pretty small piston. The tubing bender pistons are typically 2-inch diameter, 14-inch stroke. That's a lot of oil. So if you look at all the other tube benders out there, they run a style foot valve like this yellow one. And you run it with your foot. Your hands are free to move the pin around and make sure the tubing's straight. So I knew for sure, regardless of what I chose, I wanted my hands free. Now, you could do it with one hand. If I was doing the swag off-road adapter with an air-powered engine crane cylinder, I'd have the air thing in one hand, and you could do it. But if your options are open, why not pick the one that makes the most sense? My feet are just holding me up. I mean, I could fall over, no problem, but it'd be nice to have my hands free. So I shopped around, and man, you can spend a lot of money or a little money on, there's basically 3 different styles of this foot pump. There's one that's bolted together metal. It's all twisted and gross. You can see the gasket. I didn't want that. I wanted the screws to come in this way. I studied these cheap cylinders, cheap pumps a lot for a couple days before I made my choice. I'm on eBay, and if you shop around, you can find one like this where you can make an offer. And this shipped to my house, taxes and all, was $112. And it is a nice unit. It even came full of oil. I just set it up a few minutes ago. It comes with the hose. I spent $24. And if you add, this is HF 0079 and HF 0080. If you go HF 0081, I think you get both pieces in the cap. These are made by Temco. It's kind of a middle-of-the-road company. Temco will sell you this same foot pump right here, but instead of being $112, it's probably $250. Now, looking at it, it looks the same. You remember what I was just saying about the nice American company? You can pick up the phone and talk to them. I don't think I'd get a live voice for one of these babies, but $112, I'll take my chances. The one that's powering the foot pump's been sitting there 5 years. It works flawless. I use it quite a bit. So I bought one of these, and that was going to be my answer. And I've had this metal brake. I've been using it with that Porta-Power ram you saw. And that's pretty slow, so I've been looking to upgrade. I had already bought the connectors. I could run it off the same pump. I was going to mount them next to each other, but I figured, hey, now I'll have another hydraulic option in the shop. I'll put the same connector on it. The tubing bender will take it. I can run this. No sweat. But if you know me at all, the old brain never stops. How about, one more thought about these. Like I said, you can buy a enter pack. I mean, you can spend $600, $700, $800, $1,000 for one of these, or you can buy 10 of these if they ever failed. So again, I'd like to support American stuff, but in this case, the small hydraulic stuff is out of reach. In this case, thank God for Chinese stuff, or none of us would have it. Sad but true. I mean, and a lot of the stuff that's even middle of the road priced is the same rig. Or they did a really good job copying it. But I studied the photos pretty good. You can tell all the wording's the same in the ad. It's the same rig. So So I had heard that these were kind of slow on the tubing bender, but what's my rush? So I was pretty much done if I just let it alone. Let me run it a little bit. It's faster than I expected it. I mean, I'm not doing any work with it, but pretty impressive. But the, mad scientist in myself, I have seen in the past, I see them for sale used all the time. You could buy a nice American-made hydraulic power unit. Now you're talking, there's an electric motor sitting on top of a tank, and a way to control it, either a hand valve, or it's pretty common to have a foot control electrical to send the oil out. These are single acting or dual acting, but I'm obviously shopping for single acting. So you can have a foot control, which would be super handy to run the cylinder out, but you have to go back over to the unit where there's a hand valve to return the oil, or you can have the same setup with a dual solenoid valve and a foot control, little electric box, kind of like on my bead roller. And I decided that's what I wanted, so I went shopping for that. Again, I saw a lot of used Enerpacks or hydraulic packs, and you're talking $400 or $500 for a well-used one that came out of probably running a dock leveler or something like that. It's been used for 20, 30 years now. They're for sale. So it's not here yet, but I went back to the old eBay stuff. If you shop around, once again, man, there's 3 or 4 different versions of it. I chose the one that looked the best. I'm happy what came today with this. I'm hoping on the electric one that's not here yet because FedEx hasn't slid into my driveway. I bought it's 120 volt or 110, we're going to call it 115. Depending on where you are in the country, what you have for voltage during the day, but common household plug. So it'll be easy to run anywhere. And there's so many of them for sale. I found one with the tank style that I liked. I wanted a big capacity. Like I say, this would run at the 14-inch cylinder, 2x14 cylinder, but the hydraulic pack that I bought has even more capacity. I think it holds 3 gallons, so that should be all right. So what I've read and seen, they're really fast. Not too fast, but smooth. Let's go with smooth. This, when it gets pumping, like actually bending the tubing, it has to chug some, and potentially it could leave marks or ripples on your tubing. Now we're getting pretty picky, but I'm picky. So long story short, there's so many for sale on eBay. A lot of them said make offer. I ended up buying one and delivered to my house. Whenever it gets here, it was $303 for complete rig. If it comes on, if it's on a level quality of this, it's the same company. So we'll see. And if it doesn't work on the same connector, I bought a couple of these. I can interchange that hydraulic unit anywhere. Now, for less money, I found, 2-post lift or 4-post lift, 240 volt units, the tank that hang like on your lift. And I could have incorporated that because I'm going to make I'm not going to make it. I'm using an old engine crane, engine stand. I have more engine stands than any sane person should have. I picked one with the head wasn't tilted too much, and I'm going to just adapt the tubing bender onto that. Actually, I'll be able to rotate it. I want to run it horizontal, but a lot of people like to run it vertical, so I'll be able to run it either direction if I ever favor the other way. So it's going, but I could have mounted the lift pump on that. Those are they start at $170, but it's, again, $240, which I do have wired throughout my shop, and I have plenty of cords. I could have made a cord. But same deal, you got to push the button to make it go out, or be smart enough to wire up a button. But to return it, you still have a separate valve back at the control valve on the pump to return it. And I want my hands free to joggle the pin around and stuff. So you're probably tired at this point listening to me talk about my options for my tubing bender, but if you happen to be shopping for one, this could be handy. So I guess I'm done rambling. And enjoy the rest of your Saturday. It's starting to get dark out. Before I slip and fall down in the dark, I'm going to head up to the house and put my feet up. Have a great night.